The moon hung high in the sky, its pale light casting long shadows across the wilderness. The wolves were restless tonight, their howls echoing across the barren hills. But for her, they were the only family she had ever known. Her name was Clementine Ross, and she had lived among wolves for as long as she could remember. The wind tugged at her wild, untamed hair as she stood on the rocky ridge, overlooking the valley below. Her piercing green eyes glinted in the moonlight, a mixture of wild instinct and something darker. The wolves, her pack, circled around her, their movements synchronized, as though they were part of her very soul. She had been raised by them, nurtured and taught to survive by their primal instincts. The world beyond this valley, humanity, was a distant memory, a forgotten past. But the world was not done with Clementine Ross yet. The wagon that came to the edge of the forest was not something she had expected, nor did it belong to anyone she recognized. It was an old, creaky thing, the wheels groaning under the weight of its passengers. When it stopped at the clearing, the dust settled, and the figure who emerged from it was not just anyone. It was a man, Royce Barrett, who looked every bit like the kind of person who belonged to the world Clementine had left behind. Clementine watched in the shadows as Royce stepped out of the wagon, squinting against the night. His eyes searched the darkness as if expecting something or someone, and that was when he saw her. She stood motionless, as silent as the wolves around her, her eyes meeting his with an unsettling calm. There was no fear, no curiosity, just an understanding. She had heard the whispers about her, the rumors, the stories of the rich heiress who had disappeared from society, abandoning her family, her wealth, and her name for the wilderness. The world thought she was dead, but she wasn't. The truth was far more complicated. Clementine wasn't here by choice. The wolves had been her salvation, but they were also her prison. She had run from a life of luxury, from a world that had suffocated her, but now that world was back to claim her. She was part of a deal, an agreement made by her family in her absence, and now it was time for her to return. Royce Barrett had come to collect her. She didn't know what he wanted from her, why her family had chosen him, but she could see it in his eyes. He was here for a reason. He was here to pull her back into the life she had fought so hard to escape. But the wolves would not let her go so easily. They were her family now, and they would do anything to protect her. Roy stood motionless, his eyes locked onto Clementine's, and for a moment the world around him seemed to disappear. The vast wilderness, the creaking wagon, the sound of the wolves' calls, all faded away. It was just him and her, standing in the dark, separated by miles of land and a lifetime of choices neither could undo. He had expected something, perhaps a pleading look, maybe even resistance. But this calm, this quiet certainty, unsettled him more than he cared to admit. It was as if she had already made peace with whatever was to come. There was no fight in her, no anger, just a quiet resolve. "You're here to take me back, aren't you?" Clementine's voice broke the silence, steady, almost detached. Royce shifted on his feet, his hand instinctively tightening around the reins of the wagon. "That's the plan," he said, his voice gravelly, though he tried to sound confident. "Your family sent me. Your brothers. They made it clear you were to return. They've got plans for you." Clementine's gaze never wavered. "I don't care what plans they have," she replied, her voice soft yet laced with an unmistakable fierceness. "And I don't owe them anything." The wolves around her shifted, sensing the tension, their eyes glinting in the moonlight, their bodies moving as one. It was as if they, too, were ready to defend her from this stranger. Royce's stomach tightened. He knew there was more to this than he had been told. The Ross family had never been open about Clementine's disappearance, but he had heard the rumors, the heiress who had walked away from everything. And now, it seemed she was caught between two worlds, the one she had abandoned and the one that would never let her go. "You don't have to come with me, Clementine," Royce said, the words almost sounding like a plea. "But the land your family owns, your brothers are selling it. They need you there. You're the only one who can stop it." She raised an eyebrow. "Selling the land? Why would they need me for that?" Royce hesitated. He had been told nothing of the specifics, only that the Ross family needed Clementine to finalize the deal. But it was clear now that there was something far deeper at play, something that went beyond money and land. The land is part of your inheritance, he said, the words feeling like a guess, but he continued. They need your signature to complete the deal. Without it, they can't sell. Without you, they lose everything. Clementine's expression shifted, though only slightly. She didn't show emotion easily, but Royce could see the flicker of something behind her eyes, something that resembled pain. She lowered her head slightly, staring at the ground as if trying to make sense of it all. They'll never stop, she murmured to herself, almost as if speaking to the wolves. They'll never stop trying to take it all. But I won't let them use me again. Royce had seen the coldness in her eyes, but now he saw something else, an undeniable vulnerability, buried beneath years of hard choices and a life lived in isolation. The rich heiress wasn't a mere ghost, drifting from the world she once knew. She was a woman who had been forced to make impossible choices, and now, with everything coming to a head, she wasn't ready to simply give in. I'm not asking you to go back as her pawn, Royce said, his voice softer now. I'm asking you to go back because it's the right thing to do. There's something you don't know about this deal. It's not just about the land, Clementine. It's about power. Your brothers, they've made some dangerous choices, and you're the only one who can stop them. She stood still, her fingers tightening around the strap of her leather bag. I don't need be anyone's savior, she replied, her voice tinged with exhaustion. I've spent years running from their mess, and I'm not going back to clean it up. Royce understood that. He understood the weight of family, the responsibilities that came with it, and the cost of trying to escape a past that refused to let go. But he also knew that if she didn't return, if she didn't stop this madness, the wolves wouldn't be enough to protect her. They couldn't protect her from the forces her family had set in motion. I'm not asking you to clean up anyone's mess, he said, his words deliberate. But I need your help, Clementine. You're not just running from your family. You're running from your legacy. But you can't outrun it forever. You can't hide in the wilderness. For the first time, she turned to face him fully, her green eyes locked onto his, searching for something. For understanding, for trust, something she had long given up on. I've survived here. I've thrived here, she said, her voice calm, though there was a flicker of doubt beneath it. Why should I return to a world that will only use me again? A world that never saw me for who I really am. Royce took a step forward, his boots crunching on the rocky earth. Because you deserve to decide your own fate. Not them, not anyone else. But you, the wolves, sensing the tension, circled closer, their growls low and protective. Clementine stood tall, her chest rising and falling slowly, her face set an expression that Royce could no longer read. I'll go back with you, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But not because of them. I'm doing this for me. Royce didn't know whether to feel relief or dread. He hadn't expected her to agree so quickly, and yet he knew this decision wasn't just about going back to sign papers. It was about facing a past she had buried deep in her heart, a past that was about to come crashing back into her life. As they turned toward the wagon, the wolves stayed behind, their eyes following her every step. They were her family, and though she was leaving them behind, they would always be part of her, whether she liked it or not. The wilderness had raised her, but the world she had once known was waiting for her to return, to face the ghosts of her past and the consequences of the family she could never fully escape. As they walked toward the wagon, Clementine could feel the weight of the wolves' gaze upon her, like 1,000 eyes watching, judging. Their howls echoed in the distance, a mournful chorus that seemed to pull at her soul. It was as if the wilderness itself was reluctant to let her go, unwilling to release its grip on the woman who had become one with it. Royce, sensing the tension, didn't speak. He didn't need to. The journey back would be long, and the silence between them would be heavy with the unspoken truths that both of them carried. But Clementine knew this wasn't just a physical journey. It was a return to everything she had left behind. A world of wealth, power, and expectations that had never understood her, never truly seen her. And now, that world wanted her back, not as a woman, but as a tool, a pawn in their game. The sound of the wagon's wheels cutting to the dry earth was the only noise for miles. The horses snorted, their breath heavy in the cold air, as Royce took the reins with a steady hand. Clementine sat in silence beside him, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, though her mind was far from it. It wasn't the path that troubled her. It was the future she had no choice but to face. After a few moments, Royce broke the silence. "You know, I wasn't given the full story," he said, his voice low and almost apologetic. "I don't know what's really going on with your family. But I do know this. If you don't go back, if you don't stop whatever it is they're planning, things could get a lot worse." Clementine didn't answer right away. She couldn't. The pain of her past was still too fresh, still too raw. She had escaped it, run as far as she could, but it was always there, lurking, waiting, ready to pull her back in. She had spent years building a life among the wolves, a life where she was free from the chains of her family. But now those chains were dragging her back. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice distant, eyes still fixed on the horizon. "You barely know me. I'm just a woman they wanted out of the way." Royce glanced at her, his expression hard to read. "Maybe I don't know you. Not fully. But I've seen enough to know that you're more than they say you are. And I'm not here to pull you back into their world. I'm here to make sure you have a choice, because right now you don't." She turned her head slowly to look at him, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't pity or duty. It was something else, something that made her feel seen, not as a lost heiress or the runaway, but as a person who had her own story, her own fight. "I'm not a damsel in distress, Royce," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I don't need saving. I've survived on my own for a long time. I'll continue to do so." He nodded, not offering a rebuttal. He knew she wasn't wrong. She was strong, stronger than most people ever had the chance to be. But there was a difference between survival and living. And Clementine had lived a life of isolation, of running. She had never truly faced the full weight of her past, and he wondered if she was ready to do that now. The wagon creaked as they rolled through the dry plains, the night deepening around them. Hours passed, and the wilderness slowly gave way to more familiar terrain, the edges of civilization, a few scattered houses, the distant lights of town, flickered on the horizon. Clementine looked up at the sky, her breath catching in her chest. The stars above her were different from the ones she had seen in the wild. Here, the lights of town polluted the night sky, dimming the stars she once knew so well. For a brief moment, she felt a pang of longing, a yearning for the freedom of the wilderness. But it was fleeting. She had made her choice, and now there was no turning back. They stopped just outside the town, and Royce turned to her, his face softer than before. "We'll stay here for the night. You'll need rest before going back." Clementine didn't argue. She was tired. Tired of running, tired of fighting, and tired of being caught between two worlds that never quite understood her. The wolves might have been her family, but they couldn't protect her from what was waiting for her. The Ross family, her past, the deal that had been made in her absence. It was all catching up to her now, and there was nothing she could do to outrun it. She stepped down from the wagon, her boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. The cool night air filled her lungs, but it didn't offer the comfort she had hoped for. This was no longer her world. She was just a visitor in it now, a person who had once belonged but had since become a ghost. And the ghosts of her past were never far behind. The inn where they stopped was small, nothing more than a modest building with faded wooden walls, and a flickering lantern hanging over the door. It was the kind of place that existed on the outskirts of towns, where travelers stopped for a night, escaping the long roads before pushing onward. It was nothing like the home she had known in her past, the grand estates, the luxury, the wealth that came with her name. But now, all of that felt so distant, so irrelevant. The life she had once lived seemed like a different lifetime. As they entered the dimly lit inn, a warm fire crackled on the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The innkeeper, an older man with graying hair and a tired look in his eyes, nodded at them as they approached the counter. "Rooms for two?" the man asked in a voice that seemed to come from deep within his chest, as if the weight of years had settled there. "No," Royce said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Just one." Clementine glanced at Royce. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed ahead, focused on the task at hand. She could tell he was trying to remain professional, trying to maintain the distance he had set from her since the moment they met. She didn't mind. She wasn't here for comfort or company. She was here because she had no other choice. The innkeeper handed Royce the key to a room at the far end of the hall, and they made their way up the creaking stairs, the sound of their boots echoing in the narrow corridor. The room they entered was plain, nothing more than a simple bed with rough linen sheets, a small wooden chair, and a window that offered view of the town below. It wasn't much, but it was enough for the night. Royce set the key down on the small table by the door and turned to Clementine. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes now, a kind of uncertainty, as if he, too, was unsure of what came next. "You should rest," he said, his voice softer than before. "You've had a long day." Clementine didn't argue. She was tired, but not from the journey. She was tired in a way that went deeper. Tired of running, tired of pretending she could outrun her past forever. She sat on the edge of the bed, her leather bag resting beside her. Royce stood near the door, as if still unsure whether to leave or stay. "I'm not afraid of going back, you know," she said quietly, breaking the silence between them. "I'm not afraid of facing them. But I don't know if I'm ready to face what they've done, what they're going to ask of me." Royce's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw a hint of something other than duty in his eyes. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even sympathy. It was understanding. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice low, steady. "I'm not here to force you to go back. I'm here to help you figure out how to make it right." Clementine looked up at him, her eyes searching his face, trying to see if he was being honest. It wasn't the words she needed, but the sincerity behind them. And in that moment, she saw it. He wasn't here to push her back into a life she had fled. He was here to help her take control of it, to help her reclaim what had been taken from her. "You don't owe me anything, Royce," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't owe me this. You don't owe me anything." "I'm not doing this for you," he replied, his tone steady but tinged with something deeper. "I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do, and because I think you deserve a chance to make your own choices, to stop being used by people who don't care about you." Clementine's chest tightened at his words. For so long, she had been nothing but a pawn in her family's games. They had used her as leverage, as a tool, and now she was being asked to return to that life, to let them use her once more. But Royce, he was offering her something different, something she hadn't thought possible. A choice. She wasn't ready to face everything. Not yet, but for the first time in years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could take the first step toward reclaiming her life. She could fight back. She could find her own path. "I don't know what's going to happen next," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "But I won't go back to being their puppet." Royce nodded, his gaze steady. "We'll figure out together. No one else will control your fate. Clementine, not anymore." The weight of his words lingered in the room, filling the silence with quiet promise. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had someone who understood, someone who wasn't trying to take from her, but to give her something she hadn't known she needed, a chance to be free. Clementine closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself a brief reprieve from the storm that raged within her. She didn't know what was coming, but with Royce by her side, she finally felt like she might be able to face it. The wolves might not be able to protect her from her past, but maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to protect herself. As the night wore on, the fire in the hearth flickered lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the small room. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. For once, there were no expectations, no hidden agendas. Just two people sitting on opposite sides of the same truth. Clementine's return to the life she had run from, and Royce's role in helping her navigate the storm that awaited. The next morning, they woke early. The sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet. Clementine stood by the window, looking out over the town below. The world was waking up, indifferent to the battles being fought in the hearts of those within it. She had spent so many years in the wilderness, in the company of wolves, that the sounds of human life felt alien to her now. Royce, standing behind her, watched her carefully. He knew the decision she had made was not an easy one. Going back meant facing the family she had left behind. The family that had used her, manipulated her, and placed her in the center of their power games. It meant stepping into a world where she had no control, where she was nothing more than a piece on a chessboard. But it also meant something else, a chance to take control of her own fate. "Are you ready?" Royce asked, his voice soft yet firm. Clementine didn't answer immediately. She stood there for a long moment, watching the first signs of life stir in the town below. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but laced with the weight of what she was about to face. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready," she said, turning to face him. "But I can't keep running. Not from them. Not from my past. It's time to face it." Royce nodded. He had seen the fire in her eyes before, the determination to survive, to fight for something more than a life she had been handed. And now he saw it again. It was the same fire that had kept her alive in the wilderness, the same fire that would help her survive the world she was about to return to. Together, they left the inn and made their way to the wagon. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers and unknowns. Clementine didn't know what awaited her at the hands of her family, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going back to be their pawn. She was going to fight for her own future, for her own voice, and for the freedom she had found, even if only for a brief time. As they rode back toward the town, the wind picked up, tugging at Clementine's hair. The wolves she had left behind were far from her now, but she could feel their presence with her, their loyalty, their fierce protection. It was as if they had passed their strength on to her, and now she had to channel it, not as a wild woman living among wolves, but as a woman ready to reclaim what was hers. The town loomed closer, and as they reached its edge, the familiar sight of her family's estate came into view. The mansion stood tall, like a looming reminder of everything she had walked away from. It was grand, imposing, a symbol of everything she had once hated. But it was also the place where her family's plans had been set into motion, the place where the deal had been made, the place where her fate would be decided. Royce slowed the wagon as they neared the gates. He turned to Clementine, his expression soft but serious. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. "I'll be here every step of the way." Clementine nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I know, and I won't back down this time." They reached the gates, and as they passed through, Clementine felt a strange mixture of dread and resolve settle in her chest. This was it, the moment when her past and future collided, the moment when she had to face the family who had controlled her life, the family who had sent her into hiding, and the family who now wanted something from her. As they made their way up the long drive, Clementine saw her brothers standing on the porch, waiting. Their faces were unreadable, their eyes calculating. They had always seen her as a means to an end. But now, she was no longer the same woman who had disappeared into the wilderness. She had changed. She had learned. And this time, she would not be their pawn. Royce helped her down from the wagon, and together they walked toward the house. The air was thick with tension, but Clementine didn't feel fear. She felt clarity. She knew what she had to do. Her brothers watched her approach, their eyes narrowing with cold calculation. Well, if it isn't our lost sister," the older one said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Did the wolves teach you how to survive out there, Clementine?" Clementine stood tall, meeting his gaze without flinching. "They taught me something more than survival," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "They taught me what it means to be free. And I'm not here to play your games anymore." Her brothers exchanged a glance, surprised by her resolve. But the older one, Thomas, stepped forward, his smile cold and calculating. "You think you can just walk away from all of this," he sneered. "You're part of this family, Clementine. You always will be. And you'll do what we tell you, or you'll lose everything." Clementine took a deep breath, the weight of her decision pressing on her shoulders. She had been born into this family, raised to be a part of their power, their world. But that was no longer her world. It never had been. "I've already lost everything," she said, her voice sharp. "But I'm not losing myself. Not anymore." She turned to Royce, her eyes meeting his with unspoken understanding. Together, they had come this far. And together, they would face whatever came next. Her brothers stood there, silent for the first time, unsure of what to do. They had expected her to cower, to bend to their will. But she was no longer the woman they remembered. She was something else now, something they didn't understand. And as Clementine walked into the house, she realized that this was only the beginning of her fight for her future, her freedom, and her right to choose her own path. The wolves had taught her how to survive, but now she would teach herself how to live.